Um, Together we analyzed the world, and we made certain predictions about the world, right? For example, that Trump will be elected again in November, and that he will declare war on Iran. And this war in Iran will be a disaster for the United States, and it will mean the end of the American empire, and it would lead to a multipolar world, which will mean endless war and the deaths of millions and billions of people. And because of climate change, our world will eventually collapse at some point, okay? So this is an extremely hopeless, an extremely bleak and dark picture of the world. But remember, where there is darkness, there can also be light. So in this final class, I want to show you some hope and some light, okay? So this is what we call psychohistory. And psychohistory is the idea that the future can be predicted. And if it can be predicted, then it can be controlled and harnessed for the betterment of humanity, okay? So where does this idea come from, psychohistory? In the 1950s, there was an American science fiction writer named Isaac Asimov. And he's probably the most famous science fiction writer. Okay? If you happen to read science fiction, he's really famous. And he wrote a series called Foundation. And I think there's a TV series now based on Foundation books. It's terrible, but you can have a look at it. And in the Foundation books, he introduces the idea of psychohistory. And so this book is set in the future, like 1,000,000 years from now, where there is a galactic empire. So humanity has colonized the entire Milky Way. There are billions of planets. And there's an empire that brings peace to this Milky Way. But with all empires, it has to collapse. And this will lead to 30,000 years of war, violence, barbarity. And the Foundation proposes a new science called psychohistory, which is to mathematically map out human behavior over the course of 1,000,000 years. If you do that, what you discover is that there are certain patterns to human society. Okay? And if that's the case, then you can predict the future. If you can do that, then you can manipulate the course of events to make a better future. Okay? So this is what they call psychohistory. And it's a science fiction concept. And a lot of people have been trying to make it into reality, okay? So there's this very prominent historian. His name is Peter Turkin. And he's one of the founders of something called Clio dynamics. Okay? And Clio is the goddess of history. Dynamics just means movement, okay? So basically, Clio dynamics is trying to figure out the mathematical movement of history. He's trying to create history as a mathematical model. And when he did that, there's certain interesting trends and patterns that he discovered. Okay? And one idea that he discovered is something called the overproduction of the elites. Okay? Overproduction of the elite. And this concept explains why societies collapse. Now, traditionally, we've understood the collapse of societies as having to do with maybe like too much debt, or too much inequality, or maybe climate change, or war, right? What Peter Turkin points out, and it's a really interesting idea, is the reason why societies collapse in the end is you have too many elites. All right? So let me explain the concept. Okay, so society has many elites, right? You have people like Jack Ma, right? You have people like Zhou Xun, Zhao Wei, right? Movie stars. You have famous military generals, okay? So over time, elites become more and more numerous, right? The number of wealthy people go up. The number of famous people go up. The number of entrepreneurs go up, okay? The problem, though, is they all want power, right? Now, wealth and fame are all infinite resources, right? But power will always be a finite resource. In fact, it's what we call a zero-sum game. So, for example, in this classroom, there can only be one teacher, right? If we're all teachers, there's no teacher. So in society, there can only be a few powerful people. If everyone has the power, no one has any power. Okay? So what happens over time is that all these people who believe they should have power struggle for power. And because there are too many of them, this internal struggle of the elites ultimately leads to social collapse. Okay? So the most famous example is in China, in imperial China, where you had the Keju system, right? People taking the imperial examinations to become an official. Problem is, you have too many candidates, not enough positions, right? And guess who ultimately gets upset with society and leads revolutions? It's the Keju candidates who did not become officials. And so they become angry, and they lead revolutions to overthrow society, right? So the most classic example of the failed Keju candidate is Hong Xiuquan. Do you guys know who he is? The leader of the Taiping Rebellion, right? Why did he become a Christian? Why did he lead the rebellion? Because he failed the Keju. Okay? So that's the idea of the overproduction of the elite. And he discovered this principle using mathematically modeling of history. Okay? He just compared different societies and tried to figure out why they collapsed. Okay? And what he discovered is, well, it's because of the internal struggle among the different elite groups. Okay? And that's why the Roman Empire collapsed as well. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. What I'm proposing to you is that we can actually go a step further than what Peter Turkin is doing. Because we have something called AI. Okay? Artificial intelligence. And we can harness the power of AI to create real psychohistory, which is the ability to not just analyze the past, but to predict the future. Okay? All right.